Hi there, my name's Ian Alexander. Welcome to episode 2, the Tiger's Claw of the Imjin Duel series. Today we'll be looking at the weapons employed by the Japanese forces during the Imjin War. Now, contrary to popular belief, the katana was not the primary weapon of the Japanese samurai. In fact, the bulk of the Japanese forces consisted of gunners and archers and spearmen. The gunners used the matchlock, while of course the archers used the more traditional bow. The combination of these was able to be used against the opposing Korean forces to a devastating effect. When we look at the spearmen, we see weapons like this particular yari being used. It's got a triangular cross-section, and these were used for hundreds of years throughout Japanese history. It was very, very effective. This particular piece has a display shaft. Traditionally, we see these being at least double the length, if not longer. Other weapons also included the naginata, which was similar to the yari, but it had a curved blade, and this enabled the warriors using this to cut down enemies that came within their field of range. This particular piece here, now this is called a Katate-uchi. This is not to be confused with the wakizashi. It is a little bit shorter than what we would think of when we look at the typical katana. Now these range from about 19 to 27 inches in blade length. When we look at the scabbard going through one's obi or sash, we see it being a lot shorter. Now this served a functional purpose. When used with gunners or spearmen, we often find the ranks being very, very tight-knit and close together. What this meant is that you didn't want a scabbard getting in the way and banging into somebody else. This was also considered a backup weapon. So if your spear or your matchlock was broken, unable to be used, or the enemy just came a little too close, you would resort to your backup weapon. This enabled you to essentially grapple with the free hand to opposing forces. It also was super quick, agile, and you were able to get into tighter spots with this particular sword. Now, the Katate-uchi was primarily a single-handed sword. It could be used two-handed, but it was really effective with a single hand. This particular piece is what we call an Uchi-katana. It's a two-handed sword. It could be used single-handed, but it was primarily designed to be used with two hands. These came in a variety of lengths. We usually see between 25 to about 32 inches in the kind of the higher end. This type of sword was used to a great effect during the late Muromachi to the Momoyama period and would later evolve into what we would consider to be the modern katana. This particular piece dates from the Momoyama time period. Now what this means is this is pretty much right on the ballpark in terms of when the Imjin War would have taken place in. It's very likely that this particular sword may have actually seen use during the Imjin War. So it's a very, very good representative piece for the period that we're talking about. With two hands and the length that we see here, you're able to generate a lot of power with this sword, and you got a bit more reach. These type of swords were generally used by people of mid to higher ranked. Reason being is they weren't stacked together like the ashigaru were with either matchlocks or spears, and you were usually in the back. Putting this particular piece aside, we look at a similar type of sword that was used just about 50 to 100 years later. Now, this was made in the early Shinto time period. It's a little bit thicker, it's a little bit broader, and it's a lot straighter than the Uchi-katana that we've seen. This particular piece is essentially the quintessential modern katana. It didn't really change too much from that time period to what we see nowadays. And of course, this is missing the tsuka or the handle and the guard, but we can see how this balances. It's got a lot of heft to it, and given the thickness, we see this being able to take a lot of abuse. Given its straighter form, we can see that thrusts become a little more of a priority over just cutting. When looking at the two different types of pieces here, I'm just going to pick this blade up again here. We can see kind of the contrast between the blade shapes. The earlier piece being a little more curved, the later piece, and it's only about 50 to 100 years in difference, but we see it being a lot straighter. I'm not sure if you can catch it on camera, but it's also a little bit thicker. What this enables it to do is take a lot more abuse than, say, the predecessing sword would have taken, and it was really designed to be used during duels and not in massive full-scale combat. Now, this particular piece here dates to the late Edo period, and this is when we see the kind of the Meiji Restoration. We see full-scale conflict come into place again, but we see the general style of blade hasn't really changed all that much. This particular piece is designed to be used. It was also in the Hizen style, and we see it being able to take a lot of abuse. It's got a gentle curve to it. It's just as straight as the other piece, but it's got a lot of heft to it. When hitting someone, and of course, at the later time period, they would have been wearing a lot less armor per se, we can see this really digging deep into an enemy or an opposing forces here, and it caused a lot of damage. We have a piece that we'll be using for the Imjin Duel. It's a modern replica. It was actually donated by Kasan Wei, so we really appreciate that. It's about 31.5 inches in blade length, so it's kind of in the upper end of what we'd see. Now, as we see here, the Itsuku is a lot longer than what the typical sword would be. But with that said, we do see longer tsuka being used, primarily by the Satsuma forces, a little bit by the Hizen forces during the Imjin War. The Satsuma was actually known for longer tsuka. They were quite fierce, but given their proximity to the Korean peninsula, they were often some of the first people that were sent out during the battle there. So this particular piece here, when we look at the other blades, we see kind of a hybrid in kind of design here. So it's got the length. Now, when compared to the Momoyama era piece, we see it being a little bit longer. But this is also bearing in mind that the Momoyama era piece has been actually shortened by about an inch. So in terms of length, it should be pretty much right on the ballpark of where we need to be. Blade profile, however, is actually very similar to the slightly later early Edo or early Shinto era piece. We see it being a little bit straighter, and it's definitely given a little bit better in terms of thrusting ability. For anyone wanting to check out a particular piece like this, this is their Winter Sun katana. It's a really nice piece. This one is through hardened, so it should be able to take a little more abuse than a traditionally differentially tempered piece. However, it's a really nice representative piece, and it's something that I'll be using against Scott in our duel in a later episode. So that is a brief overview of the Japanese swords and weapons used during the Imjin War. Next episode, we'll be looking at the Chinese weapons employed by the Ming forces during this same time period. I want to thank Kasan Wei here for their generous donation of a beautiful sword, and it's quite representative of what may have been used during that time period. For anyone interested in buying one, please check out the Kasan Wei website. If you found this informative or interesting, please subscribe, and we hope to see you for the next episode.